tardes, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well, blessed, and enjoying family. And as always, muchísimas gracias to everyone for your guys' words, prayers, and your amazing support. And before I get into the story at hand, do apologize if the sound ain't right. As I mentioned yesterday, I just currently came back to the hospital due to, well, I don't want to bother you with. You guys know my situation. So I'm doing it through the phone due to not being able to sit, at least for the moment. But I do want to basically put out the base on a lot of questions they've been asking me to touch on. And I said I was going to touch on. So I want to speak about a Pili, right? A member that touches a lot on this base. For example, at least we're talking about 2015. From 2010, I started hearing about him and how his reach was in a little incident. You see, today I want to talk about coño. He's a Pili. As far as I know, he's from AC, right? But he's a full-blown carnal with a lot of strings. You know, along the timeline, I heard he had dual membership, but I can't touch on that to concrete say he did, right? As far as I know, he was a Pili from our side, period. But you know, the first time that I happened to hear about him was due to an assistance that we had to attend to him. Well, not me, but certain gente that I had reached to out in Nogales for something that had gotten stuck out there. If you guys get what I'm trying to say. Basically, you know, they got busted by marinos, but they didn't even have that needed to get across, so we just got asked to assist to get it across. So we did so, and that's how I personally, you know, came to hear about him. But just to touch on it, the one that was in touch with him, at least from Pelican Bay, was the homie Vago from San Rafael MS. He was a good camarada back there, and you know, when it came to coño, he was a smart individual. Again, he had a lot of pipelines he was utilizing to bring to the table, which it is why little by little it started making sense to me on how he had dual membership, right? But again, can't actually say for a fact, right? But nevertheless, before the little incident, at least with MS, he was working, right? Not necessarily with the camaradas from Cali, but with MS all around. And you guys can imagine the feria he was bringing to la mesa, right? But with that came favoritism. As you guys know, they're gonna look out for their interests. It don't matter how much of a kupili you are, right? Which of everything I heard about the individual, he was or is, excuse me. I couldn't really say it, but anyways, you see, before that big accident, there was a real mishap that led to a misunderstanding as a Ramfla or a Ramfla trip, right? Which was this happened in Arizona, right? In Florence, which was with the paisanos. You know, once you hit the Fed, you start seeing the attitudes change in the paisanos, right? Which there's more of them per se. So, you know, they unite and they start, I'm not gonna say acting funny, because that's never the case, but they start painting that line of a difference, right? And they associate most of all, Chicanos, which in our case would be Sureños, with us being a certain way with them. So they start putting up that shield to distance themselves to some extent, right? Nevertheless, the money that was coming in to coño was in relative to AC, MS, and he was working under the table with Latin Kings, right? Which, for those who know about the feds, is just not permitted, right? But again, they're above the rules, right? Nevertheless, a couple camaradas went out there, and the puntas for the paisanos out there, which is the border brothers. Pelon, he was from Jalisco, and basically he was a big individual, right? And not to say anything, he was a lot bigger than the homies or the members from MS, at least from Central and South America, that he had this incident with. So he felt that even though there was conflict, he could call them out into a cell, which they don't work that way, specifically when we having conflict, or they're having, in this case, a Billy of ours, right, is having conflicts. So they went inside the cell, even though never permission, they just took it on their own because machismo was being touched. And MS, at least from outside of Cali, they attempted to do their thing, which is understood to some extent, right? So they got stomped on, just being a buck, right? And it should have been dropped there, or if any action would have taken, it should have been allowed to address MS outside the state and allow them to take action as the paisanos, which it wasn't going to get done by the paisas. Nevertheless, Coño said, go. I mentioned it before, there was at this time high placed camaradas in this facility that would later become carnales, right? Billy from MS. So it went up, and as it always happens, camaradas will point. We do point, that's what makes a campolero, right? For those who don't know, there's some certain spots where it's mandatory for you to carry a piece at all times. I've been in spots that's a 180 that it's going up all the time, and if you had the responsibilities of the yard in any sense, bloquero, llavero, mesero, however you want to say it, you could walk up to a camarada and just be like, hey, a ver, let me see your piece. And he wasn't able to show you it, and it was means to, he wasn't programming, go ahead and remove him from the yard, because he's not ready for war. He's going to get hurt. He's going to get a lot of homies hurt, right? But it ain't even like that, right? But anyways, that's what being utilized by power hungry people. You guys get what I'm saying? Anyways, going back to the main topic. When things started being asked, because there's always that, wanting to politic when it comes to Fed and state. People started asking for a lot of reasons, right? For example, there's camaradas that were still in touch with Billys in the state, but were out there because they were from their neighborhood or they knew them personally. However, their avenue towards the Billys of camarada was a personal thing I can't touch on. But nevertheless, they started questioning Coño. For one, he got blessed in the feds, and his background, only Billy know it, right? But it was a constant thing. For example, a lot of people don't know he was one of the biggest factors when it came to, at least Chicanos or new women. They started being looked at as carnales, respectful at least, when Chicanos from AC, we were not at war on site with them, right? Because, again, he was utilizing them and, of course, touching a lot of Billy's pockets in the midst. So you guys know everything else gets overseen. At one point, we heard a lot about this individual because he had a unique avenue that once I got to the feds personally and came to Mexico, it was in reality a no-no to the ones that were out here, right? Which is where for a lot of things they were doing that, however you wanted to look at it, they were trash. Like hanging. I'm talking about kids 4 or 5 years old, scanning them, or setting little heads on bridges, just thing that will consider excuse me, just straight up trash, as a human being, and especially if you're with the game. But regardless, coño was utilizing that. So again, everything was being minimized. He had a lot of jugo, and again, to answer that question, he was a full blown Billy from Cali, at least in our eyes, as he was a carnal from AC. And at the same time, he had a lot of reach with MS, as you guys will see with the pictures. I'll be posting a lot of personal pictures on him that, I had the privilege of a camarada showing me love with him, just so you guys get a better look on things, right? But guys, I have a day and a half of not sleeping, not being able to breathe on a machine. So I will continue this a little later tonight. Palabra, I will finish. I just want to touch on it right. But so with this, I'll let you continue. A great, blessed day. I send my love. Please stay true to yourself and loyal to loved ones.